Hey everybody, welcome to Performance Anxiety, a proud member of the Pantheon Podcast Network. Thanks to AKG for these awesome headphones and microphones that we're using now on the show. They're working out fantastic. I'd like to welcome Peter Milton Walsh of The Apartments to the show. Peter's life has been full of triumphs and unimaginable tragedy. He survived the drug-fueled 70s Brisbane music scene and moved on to form the band The Apartments. He moved to New York for a fresh start and then relocated to England, where he signed to Rough Trade. After his first couple of EPs and a full-length album, he found a coveted spot on the soundtrack to a John Hughes film, Some Kind of Wonderful. But in 1997, Peter's son Riley was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disorder. In 1999, at 3 years and 8 months of age, Riley lost his battle and Peter stepped away from music. 16 years later, he was convinced to give music another go, and he's been playing and writing ever since. The band is strong, the music is honest, just like the man who wrote it. His new album, In and Out of the Light, saw Peter trying some new techniques with wonderful results. So check out the album wherever you buy music, or at theapartments-music.com, or on their Facebook page. Follow us at Performance ANX, and maybe buy us a cup of coffee at ko-fi.com/performanceanxiety. So let's get right into Peter Milton Walsh on Performance Anxiety, right here on the Pantheon Podcast Network.
Hi, it's Peter Milton Walsh from The Apartments. We have a new album out, In and Out of the Light, and it's good to be on Performance Anxiety.
Man, yeah, you didn't screw that up at all. So I want to start off with finding out about how you got into music in the first place. And I don't know a whole lot about Australia. You're actually only the second person from Australia I've had on the show. The first one I had was Anthony Pateras. Does a lot of work with Mike Patton from Faith No More.
Okay.
That's about my extent of Australia is talking to him.
Exposure. Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, sure.
I want to know a little bit about how you got into music. What was your family musical, and what were you listening to that really got you excited about music and wanting you to play?
Sure. Okay. Well, look, no, I don't come from any kind of musical family. My name is, Peter Milton Walsh. That happens to have been like my father's name. My father was Jack Milton Walsh. He was a truck driver, left school at 12, never read a book in his life, very different character to me. His father was Thomas Milton Walsh, and he was a train driver. And I've had absolutely no interest in any kind of transportation matters in my life. But I've always been interested in music, and so I'm a child of the 60s. I grew up in the 60s, and radio was a big deal to me, and I used to chase songs from because there were three top 40. I grew up in a town called Brisbane, which is in a state called Queensland on the east coast of Australia.
Okay.
And while it was a northern state, the government and the feel of the state was very much like the American South. Lots of things happened. Just like the feel that you had about living there was in the heat of the night. Because the town in which I grew up was called Brisbane. That was the capital of the state, but it was a very slow, hot town, kind of like a big country town. And the government was a deeply conservative, corrupt, the cops were in with the government. There was all sorts of politically repressive, you couldn't have street marches, they had an electoral college system to elect that government, whereby that government was elected with 30% of the popular vote. But the seats were distributed in such a way that they could still win government. So it was like a really, corrupt political environment, and also very poisonously conservative and punishingly conservative. So, like as a kid, look, there was, you didn't feel that so much as a kid, but you are sort of growing up in a very isolated kind of place. So I do think there's a thing about growing up in that territory, which is kind of why some people end up trying to get out of there, and they just look at the world. And lots of my friends at the time, we looked to. I looked to New York. I wanted to go to New York, and lots of my friends wanted to move to Europe. Either anywhere in Europe, but often people would move to England. So, like about 77, a band came out of there called the Saints, and essentially the Saints were kind of like the Stooges, and the Saints were signed by the Saints put together a single which they paid for themselves, and then they got pressed themselves, and it was released by Sire, and then they were signed in Sire in the States, and in England they were signed to EMI, so they left town on the record company's ticket and moved to England. And so, for a lot of us who were like, 19, 20 at the time, you're looking at that and you're thinking, that's what I could do. So that was that was like an inspirational moment in the history of the town for people who were into music. Okay. And also what happened at that time was that the town kind of opened up, like 77, 78, there was this just blossoming of places that bands could play. And prior to that time, clubs were very few and far on the ground, but people just started opening up places where people could play. And for a while, the cops didn't deal with that. The cops were constantly coming along, bashing people up, closing down venues, stuff like that. But that changed after a while, and then it became sort of like the great wave of bands and music that was happening a lot all around the world at that time, that sort of late 70s period. Okay. They couldn't stem the wave. And so, it became, that's how you do it. And the bands that were playing prior to that were all covers bands, and, they'd play whatever was on the radio, that sort of thing. And this whole thing was built around, this whole new thing that I came out of was built around playing your own songs, and, that people had never heard before. So it was a very different kind of thing, because if you go, it's a comforting thing for people to hear songs that they know, but it's a very exciting thing for people to hear songs that they don't know. And that was like the town was just lit with that kind of fire. Okay. Then. So that's essentially how it came about. But, I was writing songs from the time I was about 15, very terrible songs. Fortunately, the technology was just reel-to-reel cassettes, so, none of it survived. I cannot be blackmailed by my past, at least that part of my past. Right. And, and, how that came about was, as I say, I lived in, the northern part of the East Coast, and I had a cousin who lived in Sydney, which is the biggest city in Australia, and he was a far more sophisticated guy than I was. He was only a year older than me, but he was sent to a Catholic school for some reason, and he came up, stayed with my parents at one Christmas holiday, and he brought along an acoustic guitar. Okay. And he went to a Catholic school where they would listen to things like Peter, Paul and Mary and the Seekers. So he played to me a Solon, which I think Peter, Paul and Mary had covered, maybe the Seekers covered, and he also played to me Cinnamon, which was a Nina Simone version. And he played them on the guitar, on the acoustic guitar. And it was just astonishing to me. And I was about 12, I think. And I said, how do you do that? And he just showed me. And so from then on, like I had a job on Saturdays. I worked in a supermarket packing groceries, and I saved up my money and got an acoustic guitar. So that's essentially when I started playing, and then yeah. So yeah, it was that kind of background. But yeah, no, there was like my parents were born in the 1930s. So they were, I think those people born then, they were almost like their lives were like out of Victorian England, or they were they were like 19th century lives. They weren't like 20th century lives, and they seemed to just get to 19 or 20 and then start breeding, have children, and then they're adults. They don't have any kind of teenage years or any wild years. Like when I think back to my 20s were just a tornado. and their 20s were out. My dad was driving the truck, my mum was at home, they had the children, and they're just living in that kind of closed world with almost no outside influences. Whereas, by the time I was 20, it was like the world was a far more open place for people like me who could, if you could live on, Vitabrits and cigarettes. Vitabrits is a cereal. Okay. A breakfast cereal. If you could live on Vitabrits and cigarettes, which I could in my 20s, you could go anywhere.
Man. So how old were you when you first started gigging and playing out? And were you doing it solo, or did you start playing with guys?
No. Look, I did a couple of things with this girl that I knew at school, who was the smartest girl at school. I did, maybe 2 or 3 shows with her, both of us playing acoustic guitars. But then I got an electric guitar when I was 17. I had my first job. I was a postman. I was able to get, in fact, when I bought my guitar, which was a Fender Stratocaster, I also bought a Fender Twin from the same guy. And I got the guitar and the amp for $300. It was just like when I this, and he was, he was one of these people that had played music, and then it was like, I leave this behind now, and now I become a, like he was probably in his 20s, but he says, I leave this world behind now, and now I become a responsible adult.
Yeah.
And since I had no intention of becoming a responsible adult, I was able to buy his gear, and
he bequeathed it to you.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So then I would play a lot, and I would play with friends, but we just were playing around houses, inside houses and stuff like that. Okay. It was really only when the Doors kind of were kicked. I was in England in 1977, and, like that was at the time when like the Clash, Elvis Costello, the Jam, all these people were emerging, and England too felt like it was on fire with something new. And I got back to Brisbane, my sleepy old town, and my sleepy old town was suddenly lit with all these rooms open, and you could start a band. So I started a band. I just called up an old drug buddy from school, an old dealer friend. It's always good to have a dealer in the band. Who played bass. My girlfriend at the time had met this guy on a train. She was catching a train to Sydney, and she met this guy. She introduced me to him, and I'm still in touch with him. And he said that the first time that I met him, we were at a party, and I picked up Live by Five, the Rolling Stones album anyway, And I said, I'm going to start a band. It's going to sound like this. Which is just so ridiculous. Just the audacity of youth. And anyway, and I said to him, because we were talking about music, and he said he played guitar. He had a Gibson. He had an SG. So I had a Fender Stratocaster, and I played through a Fender Twin. So, a Strat and an SG, that's a pretty good combination. And then the bass player was the dealer. So we had the bass player, and then we turned up got together, and somebody said they knew a drummer, and this guy came along, and I said the first thing that I said to this guy was, do you know the beat to Be My Baby, which I love, Hal Blaine,
Oh, yeah.
And it goes, doom, doom, doom. So anyway, he played that, and I thought, okay, you're in. And so, we had the band.
That's all it took, man.
When I think about it, it's absolutely absurd, but it worked.
But
and that band lasted. Look, I can't kind of disguise this part of our history, because it's like it's out there, it's on the record. But like this king tide of heroin hit Brisbane, and everybody got swept up in it, particularly everyone in bands. So then it became a matter of like, which way do we go? Do we go deeper into habits, or do we keep the band going? And, a couple of people disappeared into habits. And so that was the end of the band. So that incarnation of the band, I started the band. I named it after, I really love Billy Wilder. I really like that phenomenal mix in his movies of, cynicism and romance almost.
You know what? I can tell through your lyrics.
Yeah, well, he had this kind of, the movie The Apartment was his, and, really loved that. But I also loved it because it seemed to me to be emblematic of, New York City. So anyway, I started the band, and I had that name, The Apartments. Nobody else understood what I was on about when I talk about Billy Wilder. No one in the band, they were not like movie people to the extent that anyway. And anyway, yeah. So it's always been The Apartments, and I've always been the songwriter.
Wow.
Yeah.
Man, so from '78 till today,
till now,
your only band has been The Apartments. Well, technically,
yeah.
Man, that's so. All right, so. You end up recording an EP around that time.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We recorded an EP, and there was a band in town called the Go-Betweens, and they had been inspired as well by the Saints, and they decided if the Saints could record something, put it out, and then send it out to magazines around the world, well, the Go-Betweens could do that, so they started their own label. And when I was friends with them. In fact, I played with them for about 4 weeks or something like that. They got an offer from Berserkly Records.
Okay.
Berserkly Records at that time had Jonathan Richman, the Go-Betweens were very much like a Jonathan Richman and the Modern Lovers band. Same sensibility, same beautiful primitive sound. So, yeah, they had a label, and they said, well, if you're recording anything, let's put it out on the Able label. So, yeah, we record. The band had broken up by the time we released that EP, but.
So you guys recorded an EP, break up, and then release it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right.
Okay.
We recorded it. The funny thing was we recorded it in April, but, then the band broke up in October, but it took such a long time, pressing and all that artwork and all that sort of stuff. It just seemed to take forever. The pressing, there was something like they lost the pressing, or I can't remember the.
God.
This is, last century. But, so it took a long time. But the band had broken up, and I'd left town by the time that it came out. So, as far as good career moves goes, it was possible not the best.
So that's when you went to New York at that point, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Mm.
So what kind of reception was the EP getting, Ed?
Look, it was good, but by that stage I had felt like I also, like, it was a bit kind of disillusioning for me with the band kind of disappearing into, heroin.
Yeah.
And, and I knew that world inside out, and I knew how sometimes it can end. And so I didn't particularly want to dive back into that. So, I just got a friend, Robert Vickers, was playing in a band in New York.
Okay.
And they lost their guitarist. And he sent me a postcard saying, we're looking for a guitarist. Do you want to come and play in the band? And I'm just thinking, well, who wouldn't want to come and play in a band in New York?
Right.
So, I did that. So I moved there, and then I stayed there for a couple of years. And, I had the band didn't last, by the way. I think the band was what he had neglected to mention to me was that the guitarist who'd left was the songwriter. Oh. And they were a very sunny, upbeat pop band. And while, there's an aspect of what I do, which is, melodic and poppy, the sunny side of it was just, I couldn't do that. Okay. So I was not going to be the replacement song. And they had a song, I think it was called Growing Up American, and the lyrics were things like, ice cream and lemonade in the sun. It was really relentlessly upbeat. And And I felt like I wasn't a perfect fit for that kind of sensibility.
Hey, well, if you like the movie The Apartment, and I can see that's you're not meshing really well.
Yeah. So then I was in New York for a couple of years, and then there was a band called Laughing Clowns,
which sounds frightening. By the way, I got to tell you, I know a lot of people who would not see that band just based on the name.
Yeah, I know. I have a friend who has a terror of clowns. So I can understand.
I got a couple too, and I have a lot of fun with them. But
but anyway, the singer in that band, they had moved to England, and I just remember when they released their first EP, and back then there was kind of like a power that was exerted by some of the magazines, and there was a magazine called NME, which still exists today, but the power is gone.
Yeah. And,
the review of their first EP in NME said there is, with no doubt, that on the basis of this EP, this is one of the greatest rock and roll bands in the world. It's like I was completely over the top hyped thing. And it was because it was I really loved that EP. It's a really powerful piece of work. It's just called Laughing Clowns. But anyway, they'd moved to England and they'd broken up. And so I joined them for a year, and, we did some English and European tour. Then we're going to do a tour of Australia. While we're in Australia, we're going to record an album. Then we're going to do another European tour. This is 12 months. That sounded pretty good to me, like English, European tour, Australian tour. I could see my parents, and I hadn't seen them for, a few years, quite a few years. So, stuff like that. We had the European tours were really good. European tours in the 80s there was a big circuit there. You could just jump in a car and you could be traveling 40 or 50 miles, and then you had another place to play. It was not like in Australia, you had to drive 700 miles for the next show. So,
holy crap.
So, we'd play, we did shows in Berlin, and, it was kind of like the circuit, like the show in Berlin, I remember we did with Sonic Youth, and then we go from Berlin, we play in Prague the next day. It was that kind of thing. You could play a lot in Europe, and lots of bands at that time were playing all the time in Europe, like the Bad Seeds, who were also Australian. They were there. They were playing something like 250 shows a year.
Oh my God!
I think, and they kept that. They've kept that up. I mean, they kept that up right through the 90s, right through the early 2000s. They just relentlessly worked their asses off, because in the 80s, the only ways that bands could survive were to be have success with radio, and that was hard to get. Yeah. And if you didn't have success with radio, you toured, and you toured relentlessly. And it's, in some ways it's a bit like that now, you just have to tour and tour. I'm an older guy now, so it's not like that's my world all the time now. I've done a lot of other things, but I think if I were 25 now and in the middle of a pandemic which ruled out touring Europe, I would be really struggling, because essentially, one, it's how you make some money to survive, and two, spiritually, it's like this is what I do night after night. I go out and I play and I meet people, and it's a social thing, it's a financial thing, it's a spiritual thing, and all of that just disappeared. If I were like, I don't know, Phoebe Bridgers, like she released her album 3 years ago, and she just toured 200 to 250 shows a year ever since then, and suddenly, no, you can't do that. Yep. And you've released a new album. You're just going to have to saturate social media now to have any effect. You've just got to be doing live streams, YouTube clips. There's 1,000 other things that you would normally not have to do too much of, because you're out there and people are seeing you all the time. And,
exactly.
So I think my feeling about the whole pandemic thing for, young people in bands is, it's tough for them. It's tough in 100 different ways. It's not just, okay, we don't have an income anymore. It's like their lives have disappeared, because I know what it's like. I know what it's like to be on tour. Your life is essentially the people with whom you're on tour, because you've left people behind. You're not exactly having flourishing relationships when you're away from your wherever you call home,
Exactly.
When you're away from that for 250 nights a year,
Yeah, exactly.
So all that disappears. And so I think, that's a big deal. That's a big deal.
So after touring with the Laughing Clowns, what brought you back to Australia? To reform?
Well, I didn't actually. Well, what happened was I finished with Laughing Clowns. I still had my apartment in New York because, back then, seriously, people can't imagine this, but, I had a 2-room apartment, which I shared with, I had a roommate to share the apartment with, but it was a, 2-bedroom, 5-room apartment, Avenue C, East 11th Street, Lower East Side, $300 a month.
Wow.
This, and you could do that because, like, I was working I did a lot of, nutty kind of jobs, despite the fact that, I have the physique of a budgerigar, or a supermodel, budgerigar, perhaps very skinny. I was a furniture removalist for a while. I worked in an ice cream parlor. I was a bus boy, tried to sell books over the phone for Time Life, just all these rubbish.
Man, that's what nobody does anymore.
No, all these things have disappeared. Yeah. Well, I think you could bust tables. I think, but I'm not sure that, you're anyway, so, but I could make in tips on a Saturday night. I could make rent for the month in tips on a Saturday night. So, that world is gone. I think you have to be an affluent person or come from an affluent family. And I certainly didn't come from any kind of affluence. And I was just working to live in New York.
We'll be right back after a word from our sponsors.
But anyway, what happened was, like Ed, who was the main guy in Laughing Clowns, he had said to me, come on board for a year. And I said to him at the end of that time, and he recognized, look, I had my own songs, I had my own things that I wanted to do. And he recognized that. So, at the end of the 12 months, I said, look, I'm going to go off and, do something else. And I restarted while I was in Australia. I finished the commitments with the Clowns, the tours, and the Australian tour. We recorded an album. And then I started another Apartments, 2 guitars, bass and drums Apartments. And I recorded a couple of tracks, and Rough Trade, and I released them as a single on an Australian label. And then Rough Trade, which was an English label, it had the Smiths at the time. Yes. They got in touch and said, oh, look, we want to release that single, which was called All You Wanted. We want to release that single in Europe. And I said, well, that's great, but look, I've actually got an album's worth of stuff. Wouldn't you rather do an album? And they said, well, we have to hear it. So I sent them the demos of the album, and then they got back and said, we're going to sign you. We'll fly you over. Wow. We'll put you on wages. We'll pay for your accommodation. We'll record the album, and you'll do it. Like if you can get here by July, we'll record the week after you get here. Wow. You'll go on tour with Everything But the Girl in September, October to support the release of the album, blah, 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 blah. So it was all like it was just happening all of a sudden. And that was, being in a band, it's a casino life, like you just have, you can be awesome. I'm not saying I'm in this class, but you can be very talented and nothing can happen to you.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Or you can have something that people want, and then, you get a break. And so I got a break by in that way. But it's a roll of the dice, I recognize now. And I definitely recognized it once I was on Rough Trade, because I remember going into the personal assistant of Jeff Travis, who was the guy that ran the label, took me into their offices and he goes, Peter, you have to look at this. And he showed me a cupboard. He opened a cupboard door, and he was covered then in a cascade of cassettes that just came pouring out of the cupboard. Oh. And he said, we get almost 500 of these a week. He said, wow. So we signed you when we got your cassette. And I thought, well, this is pretty.
Wow.
That was a luck.
Yeah.
Yeah. So then I released that, and then I was established in Europe, and so then I stayed in England for 5 years.
And then you also ended up having a song on a John Hughes movie soundtrack, which was That's right. Yeah, it was called The Shyest Time, and the movie was called Some Kind of Wonderful.
And what had happened was he had a music supervisor, and he would go round to all the labels and say, what have you got, that's just been recorded, what's fresh and new and no one has heard.
Okay.
So that he was getting songs for the movies. And I had this track called The Shyest Time, and he heard that, and he said, that has to be in the movie.
Wow.
I think we'll make it the single for the movie. So it was, it was quite exciting because Rough Trade was in trouble. At that stage, Rough Trade was in trouble because they had the Smiths wanted to leave, and so they were trying to keep the Smiths, and the Smiths were willing to stay, but it was going to cost Rough Trade, the label basically, to keep them. And also, Rough Trade had so many acts that once you'd recorded an album, well, then you go to the back of the queue. And yes, you can record another album, but it'll be like 2 years' time. The cycle was sort of like, we'll let you record a new album every 2 years that they'll pay for and, promote and blah, blah, blah. So anyway, this seemed like a good thing. And, the Tarquin, who was the guy, Tarquin Gotch, it's such a ridiculously English name, from Tarquin Gotch. He heard this track, The Shyest Time, and I had written this song. Well, I had this thing lying around, like a kind of feel lying around, but we'd gone to Amsterdam, I think. I think I was with the band. Maybe I wasn't with the band. Anyway, I was on the ferry to Amsterdam, and it was like this wild night, and everyone is throwing up on the ferry. It's like completely insane, and it's dark, high seas, freezing cold, heading to Amsterdam, in December. And, I just tried to find somewhere where people weren't throwing up. And there was this room that had some magazines in it. And I read there was a Time magazine there, and I was reading about, divorce in the US, something like that. And this woman said, I got divorced, and, I just felt like it was the shyest time in my life. I lost all my confidence. And I thought, oh, that's such a great image, such a great line. So I'm writing this thing about divorce, and Tarquin heard the song, and he goes, oh, The Shyest Time. Oh, that's so much like the teenage condition. This is perfect for us. Perfect.
Wow.
Sort of like,
man.
So on the basis of this fabulous misunderstanding, there it was in the John Hughes movie soundtrack. And to this day, I'm sure he doesn't know that, what he was promoting. But anyway,
I don't think he would listen to this podcast, so I think you're still safe.
Okay, cool.
I'm assuming he's still alive. I don't even know. I haven't.
Yeah, look, I don't know. That was like, that's the 80s, which it might as well be the 1880s,
Yeah, at this point, no. So then you started writing some more. You had 3 albums come out in pretty quick succession at that point.
Yeah. And then, after Rough Trade folded, and I just thought I'd run England into the ground, run a relationship there into the ground. So, and I hadn't seen my parents for, almost a decade because I'd been out of the country for all that time. So I came back to Australia, and then I just, met some people, and I said I wanted to do some recording. So I recorded an album called Drift, and that was picked up by a French label, licensed by a French label, and then they also licensed The Evening Visits, which was the Rough Trade album, as well, and released that. So then I'm back in Europe again, like this was the thing about being on Rough Trade. You release an album on Rough Trade, and suddenly you're getting fan mail from Italy, Stockholm, Portugal, all over Europe, Germany, all over Europe. Suddenly you're distributed and available in Europe. That album was never released in Australia. That
really?
Evening Visits. I didn't really have a following in Australia because I'd been away for like the way that this normally works is that like Australian bands that left the country, the exile bands, that was me, the Apartments, the Birthday Party, or who became the Bad Seeds, the Triffids, the Go-Betweens. What those bands used to do was release their albums in Australia, local releases, and tour over the summer. So they do 3 months of touring. So they kept up with their audiences, like they're there once a year.
Okay.
You'll see them once a year, every year throughout the 80s sort of thing. And so I didn't do any of that. So I don't really have that connection with Australians that I do with Europeans.
And particularly the French, from what I've been
the French have been very, loving toward it.
Well, I was listening to the albums, and Drift is a great album. I've really, really been getting into that. The albums from Drift onwards definitely sound a lot more lush, a little harder, more mature. Yeah. And I mean, I'm particularly fond of The Goodbye Train, Nothing Stops It, and
sure.
And you've got this deep, lush production. Is it hard to tour when you've got horns and all on the album? Are you having to rethink how you play these songs live?
Yeah, look, sometimes some of those European tours we've been able to pull people in, like a horn player, and we've also a piano player, which is good. So that kind of really, then you really have something. And it's but any band that I put together can actually play anything, really. Like the people that I play with, they can just do anything. And sometimes I'll strip it down to a 3-piece, like Natasha is this woman I've been playing with for the past 10 years or so. I did a duet with her called Black Ribbons.
Yes.
She's a beautiful singer, beautiful in 1,000 ways. She can play, piano. She can play melodica. She sings. She can play bass. So, we kind of are able to do things in a way that people recognize the hooks, for instance, like there's a track on and she and there's another French guy with whom I play this. And, like the advantage for me is that those people are there in Europe. We don't all have to fly over from Australia, right, which is, 27-hour flight and, $3,000 and, it's all that sort of stuff.
God.
So they're there. And I can rehearse with them in Europe and then go out on the road. We're there. We're ready to go. So, another guy called Antoine who plays guitar. He lives 2 hours southwest of Paris. Natasha lives in Lille, up there on the Belgian border. So we just, get together and they're great. But, I'll say to them, because, I met them. They were actually fans of the Apartments, and that's how I first met them. And I didn't know that they were musicians when I first met them, but as it turns out, like, they're both phenomenal musicians. They're far better musicians than I am.
Oh, wow.
And so, like, I could say, well, why don't we do a 3-piece thing? And they say, oh, yeah, that's great. And I said, do you want to come up with a set list? And they approach it as fans, what songs would people like to hear? And like,
that's awesome.
The last tour I did with them, I just let them, do the set list. And and I said, are you sure about this? You think people want to hear that song? And they said, no, people definitely want to hear that song. And they were consistently right, and I was consistently wrong.
Oh.
So, quite, it's quite an advantage having people who almost know what it feels like to be a fan, rather than, I'm from the inside. I've got no perspective on it.
Well, that is a really refreshing way to go about a set list and touring. That you don't hear a whole lot of artists doing that.
Yeah. Well, and all the eras get represented. We just pull the songs in from across the years, basically.
Okay. Well, and there's no easy way to go into the next phase of your life. Your son was diagnosed with a rare autoimmune disease, and everything was put on hold at that point.
Yeah. I had just recorded an album called Apart, and the record company, that was with an Australian label. They went out of business. Anyway, they said to me, we've got to get out there and you've got to do live shows, and we've got to get. And I had just, found out about my son's condition, and I said, I'm not moving. I'm not going to do a thing. I've got to get on top of this. This is what matters. And it was just like there's a larger class of things that have got to be dealt with here. I don't really give a fuck about my career or whatever, it was just something else that was on my mind. And so I just stopped, and then, 3 years after that, my son died, and I was never, and I appreciate that every person will deal with these situations in their own way. And, I don't have any answers about what is the way to deal with these things. But my feeling was I have no right to any kind of life, because my son,
I can understand that,
lost every chance he had, and I had 1,000 chances at happiness that he never got. So I just never felt right about just jumping back into, the life that I was leading before he got sick. I just never felt it was, for me, it was not the right thing to do. And I understand why people would do that, why they would just go back into the normal life, because you have to do whatever you can do to save yourself. Yeah. But I never felt like that was right. That was right for me. So I just stopped, I never stopped writing songs. I was always writing songs, but I just never thought I would ever do anything again. And then, about 10 years later, I started, and this guy got in touch with me from France, and he said, look, I know what's happened in your life, but there are a lot of people would like to see you play. And I said, look, I don't know that I can't do this. I don't think I can do this. Anyway, he talked me into it, which was a good thing, because I had to sort of push against myself, fight against, that was the biggest argument I had. It was with myself to do it. And it was a beautiful setup. I mean, this is like someone saying, come to France. These shows will sell out. I can promise you that. You'll have a place to stay, and had a place to stay in Paris for free. It was just like a million things that said yes, and the one thing that was saying no was me. But anyway, I did it, and it was kind of like, I've done this now, and the funny thing was that during that time I met a woman who had been out with her mother had been a concert pianist, and she was out with her brother when she was 8 and he was 10, and they were on their bicycles. He had been killed by a truck, and she said to me that her mother never played the piano again, and she said she just couldn't face the emotion that came with playing, and you know, and I said, well, I understand that, and she said to me, but have you ever thought, would your son, Riley was my son's name, would Riley have wanted you to be unhappy and not doing what it is you do, because this is who you are. You are a songwriter. You are a musician. And she said, would he want you to be unhappy? And so it was a kind of a breakthrough for me, that way of thinking. Suddenly I felt like I can do, I don't betray him by doing this.
Right, yeah.
So, and then, you know, one thing led to another, and then I had a batch of songs that I'd had some prowling around in my head, but I'd never played them to anyone.
Okay.
And I did a tour in 2012, and I took over some people from Australia. I took over Amanda Brown, who played in the Go-Betweens, and I took a guy called Wayne Connolly, who was a producer here, but he's also a very good musician. And while we were on tour, he said to me, you know, he was talking about his production. He said, how do you normally record? And I said, well, normally I like to just do things in one or two takes. And he goes, and if you don't get it in one or two takes? And I said, well, then it's gone. I move on to something else. And he goes, have you ever thought about doing it another way? And I said, no. And he said, well, you know, I work with a lot of people who very happily do take after take after take until they have the take. And I said, I don't think that would work for me. But anyway, we came back from that tour, and I started thinking, I wonder if I could ever do anything with these songs. Should I do anything with these songs? And I didn't really have any perspective on it. So I got him over to my place, and this is like 2014, I think it was. I got him over to my place, and I said, look, I'm going to play these songs. I've never played them to anyone before. Oh, wow. I don't even know if they should be released, but, you know, you've produced 200, 300 albums, you know, so I'm asking you. And wow. I just played them to him. I didn't say anything to him. I just played them one after another. And you know, I said, that's it. That's what it's going to be like. That's what the songs are like. They're all like, that's them. And he said, well, how is October 14 for you? And he just had a date, you know, he wanted to start recording. Yeah, so anyway, so I recorded an album. It was called No Song, No Spell, No Madrigal. And I did it with Wayne Connolly as the producer. And so that was that batch of songs. And that was kind of, I'd had those songs in my head for, some of them I'd written like back in 1999 when my son died. So, you know, I'd had them that length of time, and I'd never played them to anyone. I certainly never played them to my wife because I didn't want to subject her to that. And he was the first person who heard them. And, and I just thought as an objective kind of person, that's why I was doing it. I was taking it to somebody who, and I would have been very happy for him to say, you know, I don't think this is right. I don't think this is something you should do. But he just said, it was just that thing. It was just like click at the end of it. He said, how does October 14 work for you? Wow. Because, you know, he had a studio and And so I went in and I did everything his way because I was also trying to break out of my patterns. You know, they say, like, get out of your comfort zone. And my comfort zone was, if I do a song in one or two takes, that's good. That's when I feel like the song is done. Okay. And if it's not there, and he's far more like, no, let's do that vocal again. Let's try it again. Let's try it again. And, you know, I found it really quite draining and
I'll bet it.
Confronting.
If that's not your normal way of doing things, I can. But, you know, I felt it was worth it. And also, like, he is a great producer, so I could trust him. And I was absolutely willing to surrender to the producer sort of thing. Yeah. So the producer says, no, that wasn't good enough, do it again, that sort of thing, which I've never really done before in my life. It sounds like that's what you needed at that time, though.
At that time, I think at that time, that was the way to get the songs down, and it was just a way to deal with that particular batch of material as well.
Right.
So yeah,
the songs are incredible.
And of course, thank you.
Particularly for me, particularly Black Ribbons and 21 were just incredibly moving.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. And, Black Ribbons, I did with Natasha, and, that was interesting because, like, she has the second part.
Yes.
And he said, I need to know what this song is about before I can sing it. It's very French sort of thing.
Right.
And I thought, well, this is great. You're French. You will get this completely. And I said, okay, this is the end of the affair. And I said, but, like normally the affair ends and the people just destroy every memory. If the affair ends in the wrong way, they just destroy any memory that they have of one another, and it's not good. And I said, but these people, they realize they've run it into the ground, and they both accept that. So they almost gift the past, the thing that they had that mattered so much, they almost wrap it up in black ribbons and give it to the other person. You know what we had? It was good once, but we ran it into the ground, but it was good when we had it. And it was kind of that gift of this is what we had, and it was good. We don't have it anymore, but it was good what we had.
I'll chew through the ropes that are holding you down. When your beauty's a memory, I'll still be around. Our fabulous past, what good is it now? As your song floats down over the town.
I was a ballerina spirit level, I was insane. I had gowns all strung out in a February rain.
And it was sort of like, and for me, that was a breakthrough in writing, because normally I have tended to write, whenever I've written about, that kind of thing, they have tended to be very destructive.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a natural tendency. I think that perspective is very unique. I know I know in my experience when that happens, I kind of get destructive.
Yeah, believe me, it was an intellectual exercise. It was not based on any prior experience.
So the new album, In and Out of the Light, you actually took yet another different approach to recording that.
Yeah, I did. And, again, it was just a matter of, I think, luck, because I had all this, I'd planned this with the band. Like Nick, my drummer, he lives in England, because this is the European band. I play with a European band. Right. Nick, Elliot, the bass player, he lives in Sydney here, so that's good. Yeah. But Nick, the drummer, lives in London. Natasha lives near the Belgian border in Lille. Antoine, the guitarist, lives in 2 hours southwest of Paris. So he has a studio. Antoine has a studio. So I said, when do you think could we get into your studio? Would you like to produce the next album? And I think he felt that was quite a big deal, because like he's maybe late 30s now, I think. Anyway, he's been a fan of the apartment since he was 17. So I think he thought it was quite a big deal and quite a big responsibility. And, he said, yes, I would love it. It would be great to do it. Anyway, they all worked out that they could do something in September. We could all be there in September. And I said, I'll be there whenever you guys can be there. So okay, we planned that. And then they said, but we need to hear the songs. And I said, okay, sure. So I had some songs lying around, but my initial plan was to just go over there with them, play them things, and we could just sort of, see how it goes and, get the album done in that way. But they wanted to hear the songs. So they asked me to do some demos. So I said, okay, I'll do some demos. Anyway, so I did some demos. I demoed 2 songs. One was Butterfly Kiss, and the other one was, I think, Pocket Full of Sunshine. Anyway, I did those demos, and I actually loved the process of doing the demos, because, it was a real discovery. Like, I didn't know, I went in there thinking, oh, is this a song? I'm not sure if this is a song. You know, I was kind of, I had a sense that it was a song, but, you know, I discovered it all while I was in there. And so I sent them off, and, you know, Natasha is she writes travel books, and she was I think she was in Lisbon, and she was walking, and she got the track, like she got Butterfly Kiss late at night when she was walking by the river there, and she said, I played this song 10 times walking up and down beside the river.
Butterfly kiss, there's so many troubles that nothing could fix. Even the guy I was in 2010 is a stranger to me now. I know where we're going now. The world never.
I love this song. You know, we have to record this, you know, as soon as we can. Blah blah blah. So, you know, it's kind of good, but because I'd recorded them in that way, I just thought, I really don't want to do any more demos. You know, I don't want to go in, because that's how I felt about, like, with No Song, No Spell, No Madrigal. What I felt like I was doing was I was trying to reach back into the past of, you know, how I felt about the songs and stuff like that. Almost like, and I'd carried around the horn lines and the piano lines and the hooks. I'd carried them around my head for such a long time. It's almost like I'm wanting to do something that I've done before. Whereas what I tried to do with this album was try to do something fresh for the first time. It was almost like I'm going to discover the song as I record it.
Oh, awesome.
Which is really, you know, like how people did things in the 60s. I'm sure the Beatles didn't go, oh, I've got this song and I've finished it and now we're just going to, I want everyone to play their parts. They were in the studio and they're trying things out, and they tried different beats, and Ringo tries a different drum beat, and everything is coming alive in that moment, which is why the records have that freshness. Anyway, that's what I wanted to try. So then I thought, okay, well, maybe I could do something here and they could do their parts there, just so that I retain that freshness.
Ah, okay.
And it was almost like I'm not demoing anymore, I'm recording, and they can still do their parts, but I'm not going to be in the same room with them. You know, they'll just, you know, it'll come that. So it was almost like COVID era recording, but we weren't in the COVID era at that point.
So your parts are fresh.
And then I found a producer who lived his studio was 10 minutes away from my place, a small, inexpensive studio.
Oh, wow.
And he was a lovely guy, great ear, ferocious powers of concentration, because I don't have that. So I need someone like that. And anyway, you know, so I thought, okay, I'll approach this guy. So I went to him and I said, look, I'm not going to come in with finished songs. I'm going to come in with things. I'm going to play them for you and we'll just see how it goes. Is that something you've ever done? And would you do it? Are you willing to do it? And he said, I'm really open to this idea. You know, this sounds, I'm interested. And so we were in. So then the first day he'd heard the 2 demos and he said, we have to record those songs, which was great. And then I walked in and, you know, as I say, it's a very small room. I'm in the control room where there's a couch, and I just had my acoustic guitar and I'm playing my acoustic guitar in there. And I thought, you know, this feels good just sitting here playing my acoustic guitar. And the first song that I played for him was I Don't Give a Fuck About You Anymore. And I said, look, I think there's something here in this. And I finished that. I played it to him and I said, this is what I'd like to start with if you think there's something there. And he goes, oh, come on, absolutely. That's a song. Let's go. And so, again, it was like he said, do you want me to set the mics up in here? You seem pretty comfortable in here. So we're actually in the control room, and he just put the mics up in front of the thing and I laid down the track.
It's a mystery to me now. Whatever saw in you, I believed in your talent, I believed in your luck, but it's such a long time since I gave a fuck about you. Don't give a fuck about you anymore.
You know, and so it began. And so then there would be things like, I remember when the song Where You Used to Be, that started out with, I said, I'm just playing this. I'll play this to you. It's just like a bed of chords, and I'm just going to put it down because I have no idea how to start or finish it or structure it or anything like that. But I do know that it has parts, and some are more dramatic and some are held back and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And he said, great. And then, you know, I started playing that, and he said, I could listen to this all day. You know, this is just like hypnotic. And I thought, oh, well, that's a good sign. You know? Well, I couldn't get back into the studio. I couldn't get back into his studio for another week or so. So I listened to that stuff. And while I was away, I was able to go, okay, kill that, cut that, pull that there, you know, and you can do all that, you know, because you're recording digitally, you can do that. And also, like, I'm just, for the first time in my entire life, I have a room at the back of the house, which is to myself. I have it to myself. No one can really interrupt me in the way that I'm normally interrupted.
Like my dog?
Because I have kids. Yeah. I've got kids and a dog, you know. They do love to interrupt, but this room is at the back of the house. So I would put that tape on, rather the recording of that I had for Where You Used to Be. And then I thought, great. And then I had this thing, you know, I know where this goes now, you know, and I'm just pacing up and down and I go, there's a hole in the world where you used to be. And I'm just singing that. Yeah. And then I had it, you know, like, so it was quite, for me, it was quite a good process because it was all like new and it was like just this lovely process of discovery.
Well, Where You Used to Be is one of my favorite tracks. Yeah, I love the mention of Patsy Cline in that song.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Well, look, that's actually based on, we were somewhere and it was like the end of the ski season or something like that. And like, it's just, everything was completely deserted. And then they had these just cheap tannoy speakers outside, where everyone was moving in to get out of the blizzard had picked up and everyone's sort of moving down to this thing, but they've got these cheap tannoy speakers outside and I go to pieces and it was like, this is perfect. Like, this is just the perfect atmosphere to hear this. And it just felt like it's the end of her world, you know? It was just, and I love that song.
And I actually live in Winchester, Virginia, which is her hometown. So
okay. Okay. Yeah.
Anything with her just kind of has an automatic soft spot in my heart. So
yeah. But look, you know, like that's one of those songs you just think, you know, there's some songs that find a way to make sadness bearable and beautiful, and that's one of those songs. But it was just, you know, the whole thing about it, and, you know, in the evening, you know, Twilight, because Twilight to me, like, and, you know, obviously this is based on, you know, who I am and, you know, how long I've been around, but Twilight is just filled with ghosts. And I often, that time of night, I just often think of the people who were once in my life. And it's almost like the air at Twilight is full of ghosts, and I think of, you know, are you listening? You know, like, you know, because I think of you, you know.
You know, the album is amazing. I really, really have been enjoying it. I get a lot of the promo stuff, and you never have any idea what you're going to get when you get these albums. And it's so awesome to get one and discover a band that you didn't really know about, but now you can go back and find out all this other music that you've made. And that's,
thank you.
That's what I've been doing. Yeah. So it's,
that's great. Yeah.
It's been a wonderful discovery for me. So I really appreciate the album.
Oh, thank you. Yeah. Look, I do. have a soft spot for this album. You know, I know that, and I know that, you know, you're kind of expected to hype your stuff, and I'd never feel comfortable doing that. But I do like this album. I have a feel for this album, and I think it's also because, like, my last album is almost it exists. It wasn't so much music to me. The last album, like No Song, No Spell, No Madrigal, was, to me, it was me making a memorial almost to my son, whereas this album was more like, this is what I do as a musician. I write songs, and this is a batch of songs. I want you to hear some songs. Right. You know, you don't have to have any backstory for this. These are just songs. So it's just like what you would call a normal album. Whereas I do feel like the last album came out in a different context, and and also, you know, it was my first time back in the saddle for such a long time. You know, I hadn't recorded anything for like 17, 18 years, so it was all. How do I do this? I don't even know if I can do this, you know. So I was a very tentative guy.
Yeah, you had to figure a lot of stuff out. I mean, I can't imagine the emotions that you were going through at that point. So and look, in many ways, you know, like, because like suddenly people were interested in the Apartments, you know, on the basis of, you know, having released that album. Suddenly, you know, it's almost like I had to remake my life, because I'm suddenly doing something that I used to do that I stopped doing, and now I'm back doing it again. And like, do I even know how to do this? You know, so it was a very interesting period of new things. And people are liking it.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. You know, like, it did go down well.
I mean, it's one thing if you do something and then it just kind of gets ignored, and, well, at least I did it. But, you know, you did it, and people are really drawn to it. So.
Yeah. And, you know, I was happy to have done it, and I didn't even know, like, you know, when I recorded it, I just wanted to record it. You know, that's all I wanted to do. I just wanted, I had no idea. I hadn't spoken to any kind of labels or anything like that. I was just going to record it, and then I go, okay, well, now here is an album. Would anyone be interested in this album? And I found some people that were interested in it. So, you know, it was and it might not necessarily have turned out that way. I do feel like, again, you know, it's a roulette wheel, and I was very fortunate, you know. So I do have this kind of prowling engine of gratitude in the background of my life, and that is that I'm able to do this. You know, I don't really take any of it for granted, you know, because it might not be happening. So
exactly. And you know, you've put together an incredibly talented group of people for this album. Like you'd mentioned, you know, Elliot Fish, Natasha, Antoine,
and Natasha. Yeah,
Chris,
and I really love it.
I love Annette.
And Chris is a great look. The people with whom I played, I just love what they do. I really love Natasha's voice. There's just something about her voice which just gets to me, absolutely, completely gets to me.
Yeah.
And I really love, like, everything that she's done on the album. I really love. It's just that there's a quality to her voice. Just I can't put a name on it, but whatever it is, it's there for me.
Yeah.
And I really love her backing vocals, and and Chris, I've played with Chris from the Necks. You know, I've played with Chris since like 1994. He's played on three Apartments albums before.
Oh, wow.
And he's just great. He's like one of these guys. He's like obviously an astonishing piano player. Like if you've ever seen the Necks, you know, like they could, you know, they just improvise. They go out, they just do something different every single night. So
I'm a little new to the Necks, but I've heard them, and what I've heard is incredible. I'd say almost a year ago, I had Michael Girard on from the Swans, and he plays with the Necks a lot, and so he's like, if you haven't heard them, you have to listen. So I started listening to them after that, and it was It was revelatory. It was like,
yeah. Well, Chris is just this lovely person who also believes in song. You know, he's not just a piano player. So I played the piano, but I played the piano badly, and I played the piano on No Song, No Spell, No Madrigal, but it was just on the title track. And the funny thing was that I played it just so that we could get the bass and the drums down.
okay.
That actually reminds me, I went into this album, I did not want to record this album on the sort of concrete floor of bass and drums. I wanted everything to arrive into the song on the basis of the melody and just the atmosphere. You know, that's what I wanted. I didn't want this sort of thing down there that everything then has to fold onto and be constructed on, bass and drums.
Oh, wow.
And I do love bass and drums, you know, obviously, you know, like, I love that as the ground floor of great rock songs, but I didn't want to do that. And like in 1985, when I was recording the Evening Visits with Victor Van Voot as the producer, the best moments for me on that album, there was a track called Mr. Somewhere.
The other side of town, to get out, you take the time, anytime, like there isn't gonna be any time.
And I didn't know what I was doing, you know, when I went in there, and I was definitely not going to do that with bass and drums. So everything, it's just atmosphere. And the atmosphere came from the lyric, and it came from the melodies, and it came from just playing an acoustic guitar. It was things, just little brush strokes almost made the song. It was not like, here we got some bass and drums, you know, it's like we had kettle drums in there, you know, doing timpanis and, you know, blah, blah, just splashes of things. So that was my approach. That's right. It was far more, and that's how I approached this album. Oh, and that was the other thing that I did learn from No Song, No Spell, No Madrigal. I never had the title track, you know, ready, you know, like that title track, No Song, No Spell, No Madrigal. I just had that, I'm vamping away on the piano, and I thought, okay, well, I have no idea how this will go, but I'm going to record this with the bass and the drums, and I'll sing a vocal while we do it, and I'll play piano, even though I can't play piano. And then, anyway, it came back, and he said, this is not right. The feel isn't there from these other people. The feel is there in your piano playing. And I said, yeah, but, you know, I made a mistake. And he goes, it's digital. We'll just wipe out the mistake.
Man, thank God for technology.
So I ended up playing piano. On it. But yeah, Chris, I've played with Chris before, and yeah, as I say, he, as a piano player, he doesn't think about playing the piano. He thinks about playing the song. Wow. And I'd worked with him on a track on A Life Full of Farewells, and it's a track called She Sings to Forget You. And I remember how we did that. And, you know, Chris recorded his take, and he said to the producer at the time, I was out in the control room when he did his take, and he said, I really don't think I like that. I think I played too much. And Paul said, well, no, it sounds pretty good to us in here. And Chris said, you know, Peter, would you mind coming in here and singing it at the same time that I play it? And I said, yeah, sure thing, you know. And so Paul, the producer, said, well, we won't waste this, you know, maybe there'll be something here in this. So he set up a mic. So you can actually hear, you know, I don't know if you'll play this track in your show, but you can actually hear the door slamming when Paul walks out, or the producer walks out, and then Chris starts playing. So we did that live. And then we go back, and then Chris turns to me at the end of that and he said, that was better. That's the take. For me, that's the take. It was because he just didn't want to overplay.
Wow.
So he's that kind of musician. It's the song first. And as it turns out with that song, you know, I went back into the control room and I said, okay, well, we can keep his piano and I'll just do another vocal, you know, further down the track. And they said, why would you? You know, they said, that's it, it's done. So we just kept it. It's just, and that song is just piano and a vocal. So Chris likes to work with me in that way. So he said when we were recording the songs, can you stand next to me and we'll do it. So we did, we talked through till dawn. We did that live.
Wow.
That's one take, Chris and I, one take. And the fading light is Chris and I again, you know, next to one another. And I think some of the vocal I redid anyway, you know, but
they drew on through the fading light. They drew on through the fading light. While they're looking for ain't there anymore. The places no longer exist.
For the most part, it's live, but that's how he works, and that he thrives off the vocal. Yeah, but I had gone over to his place to play because, as I say, I do play the piano, but I don't play it well. And no one plays piano like Chris Abrahams, of course.
Right.
But went over to his place and stood next to him at his piano, and he said, you know, we talked through it to dawn. You know, there's two ways to me that the song suggests. Like, you've played it in this kind of elegant, spare, Satie way, and it works beautifully like that. He said, but you know, there's so much swing in the song. You know, it can also be played like a Nina Simone song with, you know, it's just swinging. And I said, okay, well, you know, let's try that. He played it once and I said, that's it. That's how we're going to do it. You know? No question. You know, we'll do it, you know, if we can do it like Nina Simone, let's do it like Nina Simone.
Yeah, exactly. I have kept you for quite a while. And
okay, sure.
Sure, you have about a million other things you would rather be doing than talking to me at this point. But where
look, it's very generous of you to have me on anyway.
Oh,
I'm very grateful. Yeah,
I'm very happy to have just discovered you for myself. I mean, you've discovered back in '78, but I can't really claim that part. But where can people find and order the album, and how can they follow you on social media? Well,
there is a website which is the apartments-music.com. That's where we are, okay. and all the ordering details are on that. There's also an Apartments Facebook site which is maintained with great sincerity by my wife rather than me.
I don't blame you on that.
Yeah, yeah, you know, because you could be on that stuff all day.
I know.
Like, it's just distracting, you know.
I go down rabbit holes with the little bits of stuff that I've got.
Sure, yeah. But also there is, like, you know, it's on all the streaming services, you know, Apple, Spotify, Amazon, and also you can buy it through Amazon in the States, which is pretty. You can get the vinyl if people are vinyl people. Yeah,
that's awesome.
And CD.
Do you have a social media account or social media presence on Instagram, Twitter, anything?
It's just the Facebook account for the Apartments.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. This has really been a blast. It's been awesome chatting with you and learning about the history of the band and how you got through.
Look, you know, it's funny, you know, for me talking about this stuff, like particularly, you know, going back through the years, because I'm just thinking about this stuff for the first time, because I don't, the landscape of regret I'm very comfortable in, so I don't often think about what went before, But when I actually have to think about, what was it like in '78, it's been interesting for me too.
Whatever it was that went wrong, she poured it into song. Whatever it